got another story here from Australia. The gentleman is from Townsville in Queensland, Australia. He writes, one time when I was a younger lad, I saw some Yowies attack a boomer. That's an old gray kangaroo. When I saw them come out, I hid behind an old tree stump. They grabbed his back legs and ripped them right off and then held them up like trophies. Another Yowie, much bigger and older looking than the others, came out of the bush. I was 6 feet 7 inches tall back then, and even the smallest of the three made me look small. The big one's body had more muscles than the Incredible Hulk. I watched them and they started fighting over the kill. The two younger ones took the legs from the boomer, and they growled like lions and started smashing each other with the legs. It was so powerful that I felt the ground vibrating under my feet. The bigger Yowie towered over them like a tree and he growled. It was so loud that I lost control of my bowels. He banged the two younger ones' heads together like wrestlers and then kicked one in the chest. It flew into the air and into the billabong. In Australia, a billabong is like a small lake. But this was no small billabong. It was big enough to hold some big old saltwater crocs, some as long as 20 feet that I had seen myself. The Yowie hit the water right by an old salty croc. He grabbed the croc by the tail and picked it up right out of the water, and he punched it in the head. The old croc grabbed onto the Yowie's leg, and the Yowie screamed and roared, and the croc grabbed onto his hand and fingers. The other Yowie stopped fighting over the kangaroo and joined the one in the billabong. One of them jumped in and smashed the croc's head with his fist, and then it grabbed the croc by the jaws and opened them so wide that its head bent backward and the jawbone snapped. Then they tore the thing apart. One ripped its tail off and another ripped its back legs off. One pushed its finger into the belly and ripped it open and tore the guts out and then started eating them. All the blood in the billabong brought more crocs, and the Yowies took what body parts they could, threw it over their shoulders, and jumped back onto land. I felt the earth shake again like an earthquake. After they vanished into the bush, I crawled out from behind a tree stump in complete shock. I slapped my face to get my head working again, and then I went out to measure one of their footprints against my own. I'm a big guy. I wear 17 shoes. You can't get that size of shoe in Australia, so I have to order them from the United States. When I put my shoe next to the footprint, it was much longer and wider, the biggest footprint I had ever seen. I looked into the billabong and saw the other crocs eating the one the Yowies ripped up. I've seen Yowies in other parts of Australia, too. I think they must be magical or something. I told my experience to some Aboriginals, and they told me the Yowies talk to them and work with them, too. Some are very wonderful at heart, the brother of people and guardians to the earth long before white men landed in Australia. But tribal Yowies are cannibals. The Aboriginals told me stories about years of giant lizards fighting with the Yowies. It started with a young Yowie playing in the billabong, just like human kids do, splashing in the water and playing around. A giant lizard, much bigger than the old salty crocs, went after it, and it bit the young Yowie's leg off and bloodied the water, and all hell broke loose. The other Yowies heard the younger one howling, and then went to the billabong. A group of them jumped in the water and smashed the lizard's head and tried to free the younger one. In the end, 2 Yowies died. The man who told me the story said the mother of the young one that died was mummified holding her dead child, showing they have great power of love for each other just like us humans do. This event started the Yowies' hatred for the lizards and the crocs. And that's the end of the story. That is woo! Man, this guy witnessed an action-packed day at the billabong right behind the stump. I thought this was pretty amazing. I wanted to share it with you. A pretty good story from Australia. Hope you liked it. I appreciate the writer sending it. I read them all. I can't attest that any of these, not one single story I've ever read is true, but I read them all, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's pretty suspenseful. Okay, let's go to another one. Welcome to the Dixie Cryptid channel. My name's Cameron Buckner. We don't ask for money. We don't have membership dues. Everything on this podcast is free. I've got 5 stories, brand new stories for this podcast. And at the end, after the 5th one, I'm going to drop a couple of archive stories for people who may not have heard them. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. All right, here we go. I was raised in the small town of Eldridge, Alabama. One night in the summer of 1990, my family and I were watching TV with the windows open. And out of nowhere, my father jumped up, he grabbed the remote, and he shouted, "Did y'all hear that?" My mother and I shrugged, and he told us to wait and listen. We got up off the couch and walked out the front door, and we looked around. Right across from us is my grandfather and cousin's trailer. As we looked toward their home, we saw an 8-foot-tall Bigfoot standing at my cousin's window, staring at him as he slept. My dad got on the phone and he called my grandfather, and he told him what was happening. My grandfather grabbed his .30-30 Winchester rifle, and he walked quickly but quietly to my cousin's bedroom. When he opened the door, he caught the Bigfoot reaching in the window toward my little cousin. And when he realized what he was looking at and what this big brute was trying to do, we heard him yell out, "I don't think so, you stinking SOB," and he opened fire on it, and he shot it straight in the chest. The Bigfoot roared and hit the side of my grandfather's trailer so hard that the force knocked it off its brick foundation. There we were, in our home, right across from it, watching it all happen. My dad and I were in protective mode at that point. We grabbed our rifles and joined our grandfather outside, and we unloaded into the beast. That thing roared and tore through the trees like a D9 bulldozer. My mother called the police while we were checking on my cousin. He was unaware of anything happening. The gunshots in the same room barely even woke him up. I swear that kid could have slept through a raging hurricane. 30 minutes later, 2 deputies showed up and we told them what happened. After hearing everything, one of the deputies took his flashlight out and he shone it in our eyes and asked us where the drugs were. I thought my grandfather and dad were about to whoop his ass until the other deputy stepped in. He told his partner to open his eyes and look at the condition of the trailer. There was no man who could cause that kind of damage to a mobile home and knock it off its foundation. Then he pointed his flashlight a few feet away and lit up a massive footprint this beast had made. There were complete right and left prints, and then another right print, and 3 steps, and that's all it took for the Bigfoot to reach the wood. We measured the tracks, and they were nearly 17 inches long and 6 inches wide. The deputy, with common sense, said it looked like a Bigfoot. He took the report and took the pictures right before he left, and he looked at us and he said, "Don't let nobody tell you that this was a bear," and then he left. We love your show, and we've been listening for almost 6 years now. It's okay to use my name. I know what I saw. And the writer's name is Elvis. Man, what an exciting story. I wonder if they've had any other activity around there. I wonder what happened to the Bigfoot that got shot up. Do those things just heal miraculously? Or do bullets just not hurt them? I don't know. This thing got shot up pretty good. These folks were ready. Don't be reaching in and grabbing little cousin through the trailer window. You're going to get shot, Bigfoot. This was really exciting. I appreciate you, Elvis, for sending it. It was great. I hope you guys are doing okay. I was raised believing that Bigfoot is real, but I never gave it much thought, and I never went out of my way to look for it. And my dad was raised on the reservation in Nevada, and he told me about the thigh eaters and the hairy people. They're not the same thing. I was raised in Hawaii. Even there, you can find the mummified remains of the red-haired giants in massive canoes, including those of a warrior woman who was 7 feet tall. they came from a comet and began the ruling class, though the truth of that has been lost to time. I left Hawaii to explore the mainland and pursue a career in modeling. After graduating from high school in 2011, I found myself frequently traveling to California, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, and Mississippi for weeks to months at a time. Each place I've been, I've had experiences. I've noticed many correlations between the missing people in state parks. I believe the giants and the hairy people have an affinity for human women, and I do believe they have preferred the look of human women. It's just a gut feeling, but it seems there's a preference for First Nations women. The first time I saw the pictures of missing women in British Columbia, the hair on the back of my neck stood up on end. It made every experience I've had suddenly more troubling. I'm Native American and Polynesian and of European descent. These women looked like they could be my relatives. It was hard to ignore. My first experience was in 2013 when I was in Texas. There wasn't a whole lot to do if you were in the sticks. That evening, I was at a friend's house. It was around 9 p.m. and my friends and I decided it was a great time to play hide and seek in the woods. I was hiding under another house on this property with my teammate when a smell came out of nowhere and saturated the air. I said to my friend, "This is a stupid spot to hide. The pipes must be leaking. The last thing I want is pink eye because of this." But when we climbed out of that spot, the smell was much worse and it hit us like a wall. Somehow my eyes were drawn to the tree line, and as soon as I looked, a section of the trees started shaking, as if something had its hand around the trunks and was waving them back and forth to get my attention. Well, I couldn't see anyone out there, but I noticed that the tree line was opaque when before the moonlight splintered through it. Well, I screamed like a pansy and I ran away. I never played that game again when I was at my friend's house. The experience scared her so bad she refused to talk to me about it. A month later, 30 miles away from the first encounter, I was home on the back 10 with my dog. I had just had an argument with my boyfriend and I was crying, sitting on the ground like a baby. This wasn't my finest moment, but I think that's how things unfolded the way they did. Now, the neighbors had cows that frequently got up on the property that I'd help wrangle up and bring home. I was all too familiar with what a cow sounded like, how loud they can be, and what it sounds like when they're walking through the thicket. I could hear the cows making a lot of noise, but they were far away and getting farther. And there I was, crying about a stupid argument, when my dog went suddenly on the edge, his tail straight up and the hair on his back standing up. He was looking out the tree line, not moving. He was growling. He wasn't doing anything, but he was frozen. I could hear the footsteps, one after another, as the autumn leaves crunched underfoot. It was loud and heavy, and I could feel each of its steps in the ground underneath me. And then I heard a mooing, only it didn't sound like a cow. It sounded like someone being a fool and imitating a cow. Well, I sat there confused as this voice and the footfall got closer. My dog was still frozen. Nothing clicked for me until the footsteps stopped right in front of me in the trees, 30 feet away. That's when my dog started growling. And when my eyes searched the trees, I saw the top of the creature's head backlit by the sunset. I jumped up, grabbed my dog, ran back to the house. I wasn't afraid I was going to be taken. I wasn't afraid I was going to be killed. I was afraid that I would see its face. I don't know why, but the thought terrified me. In the end, I didn't make out any details because all I saw was its round head. I later returned to that spot to measure its height. I felt sick to my stomach with shock because the creature would have been 9 feet tall. I knew it wasn't some giant cowboy because I think I would have noticed a 9-foot-tall cowboy walking around our town. When I told my dad about it, I got in trouble. He believed every word. He told me my crying called it in. It probably thought I was in danger or hurt and was coming to check me out. My stomach sank. I thought about the pictures of the missing women I had seen, and I thought about our remarkable resemblance and how close I might have been to having my picture on a heartbreaking list next to theirs. That was the last time I cried like a baby in the woods. My dad made me promise that I would never do it again. I once made a trip across the country from my school in San Diego, California, all the way to Tallahassee, Florida. I stopped on top of a mountain somewhere in Arizona for a break. In the middle of the night, something rocked my car and it woke me up. Well, I finally made it to Tallahassee, but my Ford Fairlane had stopped cooperating. I ended up having to hitch a ride to my girlfriend's house, and she lived a good distance from town. On my way back to my car later that night, I had to walk through the woods. Her father and I would go squirrel hunting in those same woods, and we would always come back with enough of those tree rats to make a good-sized purlow for the entire family to feast on. Sometimes I would go out on my own and track deer that lived out there. I was a good tracker, if I say so myself. I could walk up on a pile of scat that was still steaming and feel satisfied knowing how close I was to my prey. I guess that's the Native American in me. My grandfather was part Creek Nation, better known as the Seminoles. On my way through these woods that I had been in many times before, I kept noticing something walking just out of sight, but in hearing distance. I stopped a few times to take a good look to see if I could spot something, but when I stopped, it stopped, and that gave me the creeps like you would not believe. Something was tracking me. I guess it's the way the deer felt when I tracked them. It was a 6-mile hike back into town, and for most of the way, something heavy in the woods walked with me. I did make it home okay, but the creepiness of that walk has stayed with me. Thank you for letting me share my story. That was a good story. Really good story. 2 stories in this podcast by Native Americans who have frequent encounters with Bigfoot. It's pretty awesome. I don't know if it's something in their blood or what it is, but Native American people seem to see them all the time. Thank you for the story. It was great. All right, here's a story from my hometown, Memphis, Tennessee, where all the National Guard people are at right now, cleaning that city up. Well, I'm sure happy about that. Maybe I can go over there next spring and go to a Redbirds game. I won't even go over there. There's so much crime in Memphis, and I'm so happy that's happening. Anyway, here's a story from Memphis. Hey there, Mr. Dixie. I hope this finds you well and happy. I'm in my 50s, and I live north of Dallas, Texas. I was born in your neck of the woods, and I lived in Frazier for much of my childhood. A while back, you shared a story about a UFO sighting in Memphis, and it reminded me of something my mom and her best friend saw in the late 70s when I was 9 years old. They were driving to her friend's apartment when a huge glowing orange ball appeared in the sky in front of them. They stopped and got out of their car. They watched it move like nothing they had ever seen, until it went straight up and it was gone. The strange thing is that it was in the middle of the day on a Saturday. People were in their yards and on the sidewalks, and they stopped to watch it, but there was no noise at all. Dogs even stopped barking. When it disappeared, everyone just went back to what they were doing. No one said a word or even seemed to care about how big and bright this glowing ball zipping around the sky was. My mom had another strange story about a hermit who lived down at the Mississippi River. One night, she and my dad and another couple on a double date heard about this hermit, and they wanted to see if it was true. They walked through a small patch of the woods before reaching the water, and when they got there, they saw a hand-dug ditch in the riverbank. It looked like something was living in there, and there was a big pile of bones nearby. Well, they had seen enough. And when they turned tail and ran back the way they came, they heard something running toward them. They jumped in the car and tried to take off, but the hermit had appeared out of nowhere and slammed his hands on the trunk of the car, leaving big dents in it. That was no easy feat, considering those old cars were made of real steel. I asked my mother the other day about what the hermit looked like. She said this thing was huge and it was dirty and hairy. I asked if she thought it could have been a Sasquatch, but she said no. He was wearing tattered pants. He was a man who went wild. I have a couple more stories that happened to me, but I will save those for another day. I love your channel. Now listen as I clean my house. Thanks for reading. I really appreciate this story. When I was younger, I remember hearing stories about that hermit that lived down on the river. Now, Memphis is a big city. And even back then, when we were kids in the 70s, it was a pretty big city and we didn't know everybody. But words got around Memphis, and it was almost like always kind of characterized where I grew up as a giant town, because even though, there were huge neighborhoods, it's just a big metropolitan area. But these rumors and stuff seem to spread all over Memphis about all kinds of things. And I remember I lived out east toward kind of where Perkins and Summer Avenue intersect. Anybody from Memphis will know where that is. But I lived in that area, and we had rumors around our neighborhood about hermits living down in the ditches, which we would go looking for. We'd put our bikes down in those ditches and ride for miles. I remember this story is what I'm trying to say, and I thought it was interesting to actually get an email about it from somebody, because it was those were always intriguing rumors, and come to find out this one down at the river was true. So I really appreciate this story. Thank you, ma'am, for sending it. I started bow hunting when I was 16. We own and hunt 50 acres of woods in northeastern Indiana. It's one of the largest parcels in the area and has provided us with some nice deer over the years. I'm 47 and I'm now an experienced hunter, but at 16 I was still pretty green. I knew the deer that came into my woods traveled back and forth to the woods 3/4 of a mile to our west. So one day during the summer, I decided to secretly trespass onto the land to look for any signs of what and where they may be. This was not done for the intent to poach, only to learn what might be there and eventually make its way over to my woods. I only had a canteen and a hunting knife with me, but it was a short trip and the scouting didn't take long. As I made my way to leave, I came to a creek that divides the woods in half and began looking for a dry place to cross. And as I did so, I suddenly became aware of what I can only describe as a low moan that grew louder and louder. It grew so loud on one continuous note that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It went on for what seemed like minutes, although I'm sure it wasn't, and then it abruptly and instantly stopped at the height of its crescendo. I immediately leapt into the creek, crossed, and sprinted with all I had out into the bean field that bordered the woods. And at some point, my field knife found its way into my hand, but I have no memory of drawing it. I told my parents about it. They said it was probably the landowner trying to scare me off and teach me a lesson. Well, the following Monday morning, Dad was taking me and my brother to school when we decided to stop at the local Greasy Spoon for breakfast. My dad got to talking to the local farmers, as was the custom, and inevitably my incident was brought up. I remember it very clearly. One of the farmers looked at me and said, "Well, what do you think it was?" Well, I said, "Probably just the landowner trying to scare me off." "And you think he can scream loud enough to vibrate your chest?" the man said. Well, I shrugged my shoulders and then asked, "Well, what do you think it was?" He half smiled and he said, "Probably the same damn things the farmers see jump out of their fields every year during the harvest." "Well, what do you mean?" I asked. With all the concern of a man discussing the weather, he said, "Oh, they'll be harvesting crops, mostly at night. When they get to the end of the row, those damn hairy wild men will jump out and run to the closest woods or fence row." The conversation quickly turned after that. My dad could tell I was freaked out. And on the way to school, he said, "You know he was just teasing with you, right? There's no hairy men running around the woods screaming at people." Well, I know my dad meant well, but at 16 years old, I was far from convinced. In the last few years, I've introduced my children to bow hunting. They've taken to it like fish to water. My daughter got her first deer when she was only 13. My 10-year-old son quickly joined the ranks when he was only 8. Last deer season, I was up at 3:30 a.m. getting ready to sneak out the back to my stand. I like to be in it at least an hour before sunrise. I walked 1.5 miles in the dark, moving as quietly as possible the whole way so as not to be heard. It's quite a workout to carry my bow and all my gear all the way down there. Well, I got up to my stand. I was all settled in and was about to take my usual nap. I just started to doze off when I was hit with an overwhelming sense of dread and panic. I've had only 2 panic attacks in my life. Both times I knew what was causing them and I was able to get them under control. But this was something completely different. I was overcome with a mind-numbing sense of urgency to get out of the tree stand and run as fast as I could. Well, I pulled my knife, then I grabbed my flashlight, but it didn't turn on. My eyes frantically searched in the darkness for any explanation for what I was feeling. And I then realized this sense of panic had a direction. That's the best way I can explain it. I could feel where it was coming from. Again, my mind was flooded with the overwhelming desire to climb down and run as fast as I could. It was at this point, on the faint but very recognizable voice of the Holy Spirit intervened and told me very clearly to stay. I sat there and I tried to calm my mind and focus on what I was being told. Again, that clear, small voice said, "Don't get down, just stay where you are." So I stayed. I immediately sent a text to my wife and I told her what was happening. I asked her to pray for me, and I began praying too. And I prayed non-stop for 30 minutes. And suddenly, it went away. The feeling subsided, and the panic was gone, and I was utterly exhausted. A few minutes later, the sun crested the horizon to my back, and I had a clear view of the woods from my tree stand, 20 feet up. And there was nothing there. During the time I was there, I heard absolutely nothing. No birds, no animals moving about, no crickets, no wind, nothing. My woods are located 1/2 mile from a main highway. Normally, I would hear the occasional vehicle driving by, but not on that day. I remember looking in that direction and seeing cars and semis, but I couldn't hear them. I could hear the rustle of my clothing when I moved, but that was it. Any good hunter will tell you that we hunt by sound as much as sight. Almost every deer I've ever killed I heard before I saw it. Not to hear anything that day only served to intensify my panic. I sat and hunted until noon before I finally decided it was time to go in. My wife would later tell me I wore an expression she'd never seen before when I arrived home. She said I looked like a frightened or confused child. That was definitely a blow to the mighty hunter ego that I was going for. She gave me time to change clothes and relax a little bit before she started asking questions. Well, I'm a big fan of Occam's razor, which states entities should not be multiplied beyond necessity, or more plainly, the simplest answer is usually the correct one. We ran through all the simplest answers before moving on to the not-so-simple answers, and they left us more confused than when we'd started. On Sunday, I spent the entire day researching. I wanted to see if anyone else had experienced this. At first, it was a rabbit hole with no logical progression, but after a while, some common threads started to weave together, namely the idea of infrasound. Over the next week, I convinced myself I had dozed off and had some kind of nightmare, but I continued to research just the same. I learned that some predators, lions for example, use infrasound to instill confusion and panic into their prey to make them easier to catch. Have you ever watched one of those safari documentaries where a lion hunts a zebra or a gazelle? A lot of times the rest of the herd will take off running when the lion charges, but the one he gets hesitates for some reason. It stays still, looks confused or disoriented. Well, that's infrasound. I can't hear it, but we can feel and experience the effects of it very easily. The U.S. military has been experimenting with it for years. Well, I began finding theories on another creature in North America that is believed to use infrasound. The next weekend, when my daughter and I went out to hunt early, any doubts I had would vanish, and she witnessed it all. By the following Saturday, I had done my best to put it out of my mind altogether. My son was feeling ill, but my daughter and I had gotten up early and stalked back to the same location. She got into her stand, and I got into mine. We were about 15 yards away from each other. 30 minutes into our hunt, it was still dark, but the moon was full, so we could easily see 20 yards in front of us to a small clearing. It was a major deer run where we knew we'd most likely be shooting come first light. Well, as we sat there, we clearly heard something approaching from the south. It's not unusual to have deer meander by in the dark, especially when they're some 20 feet below. I assumed that's what we were hearing until I realized it sounded bipedal. Every year, poachers try to sneak onto our property and kill a deer or a raccoon, and then they leave before sunup. I immediately thought this must be a deer poacher then. With my 500 lumen light in hand, I prepared to let this guy walk into the small clearing in front of us, where I planned to blind him and tell him to leave. It would be easy to spot him in the moonlight. The heavy footsteps crunched through the leaves, slowly moving away to the northwest, but I could see nothing. I was looking exactly at the spot where the sound of the steps was coming from. It was only 12 yards from my stand, but there was nothing there. My daughter would later state the same thing. When the steps were 15 yards directly due west of me, I still couldn't see anything. The moon was full and extremely bright. I could clearly see the outline of my daughter in her stand, but I could not see what was making the sound of the footsteps in the leaves. We later learned that we'd both wanted to text each other at that moment, but we were both afraid that it would give us away. When the sun finally lit up the sky, I looked over at my daughter. She pointed at her phone for permission to text, and I gave her the thumbs up. Her text said, "Can we go? I'm scared." Well, I wrote back, "Let's wait until the sun is completely up and we can see everything." "What was that thing? Did you see it?" She texted back, "I don't know what it was, but it was huge. Can you see if Mom will come get us? I don't want to sit here anymore." I told her to just sit tight and wait until it was really bright. We would be less of an easy target if that thing turned hostile. An hour past sunrise, we climbed down and we hightailed it back home. There is a theory that Sasquatch can cloak. It has been postulated that certain types of translucent hair follicles will bend light when vibrated properly by infrasound. Perhaps this explains why we could hear it, but we couldn't see it. And if Sasquatch is real, and I believe they are a diluted offspring of the Nephilim, the Bible clearly shows that the Nephilim returned after the flood. I think they are a polluted bloodline of these beings. That would explain why some of them have supernatural abilities, great speed, incredible strength, infrasound, the ability to cloak. I believe the Sasquatch Genome Project lends some credence to this. With the Sasquatch Genome Project, it turns out we have dozens of samples of hair and blood DNA that comes back as human female, unknown male. What does the Bible say about the Nephilim? They are the product of when demons laid with the daughters of men. Female DNA, unknown male DNA. Well, I know that sounds crazy, but I have a heavy background in science and research. I have a master's degree and 2 bachelor's degrees and an associate's degree in business. But strangely enough, this makes the most sense scientifically. Oftentimes, we Christians relegate Bible things to the Bible. Never enters our minds that they can and do still exist. Where in the Bible does it say that the Nephilim were completely destroyed for the second time? Well, it doesn't. We are only told that they were killed off once and then returned. I also believe this is why prayer seems to work. Both times when I prayed, the thing left. At any rate, this is my story. The following day, we went back to that location and we found dozens of nuts placed 10 to 12 feet up in a multiple Y branches along our access trail to our stands. Well, I grew up in those woods and I've been playing in them for 40 years and I have never seen that. I took pictures for reference. I realized they proved nothing, but it was an extremely odd event. Like most people, I never believed Bigfoot existed outside of stories. I always figured if they did exist, there'd be some kind of proof, like bones or excrement, hair or nests. And like most believers, I've had some experience that have changed my stance on the topic. In 2013, we had been in charge of taking care of nuisance hogs at a pecan farm for over a year. The farm also included a few fields of cotton, but the hogs tended to leave those fields alone. The pecans ended at the tree line, and that led to thousands of acres of untouched Georgia forests. A creek ran through the forest as well, along with a whole lot of deer. I was partnered with two guys from my office. One was my best friend Jim, who has influenced me into becoming a Southern-speaking red Mexican. A Southern-speaking red Mexican I am today, okay. The other was Greg. He runs a hunting guide business on the side. By the way, the man's name who wrote this, he has a Spanish-sounding name, so I'm guessing he may be, or his family may be from south of the southern United States border. We were having a great success baiting the hogs at the tree line using automatic feeders, but the population was so dense we were barely making a dent. It was probably the heavy concentration of game that drew in a family group. One night we were spread out and using the last pecan trees as natural blinds from the tree line that was about 30 yards away. I was sitting at the base of the tree to hide my outline. There was a farmhouse near the entrance to the field where a light was just bright enough to backlight us. Well, I didn't expect to see anything anyway, and the wind was behind us blowing our scent straight into the tree line. Surprisingly, I started hearing movement and twigs snap, so I readied my rifle. It was a clear night with plenty of moonlight to see the tree line. I didn't see any shadows moving around yet, but I was patient. Thump! Something hit the ground right in front of me, scaring the crap out of me. I thought a branch had come off the pecan tree. They're always losing branches. Well, I jumped to my feet and turned on my weapon light, and lying just a few feet in front of me was a 2-foot piece of oak branch dug into the ground like it had been thrown. It was 3 inches across, and it did not come from the tree above. I jumped behind the tree and swept my light across the tree line, and then I called my buddies to come over, and as soon as I told them what happened, Greg started shouting that they were trespassing on private property. We were the only ones with access to hunt there, and we pressed up to the tree line and shouted for them to come out and show themselves. Well, after a few minutes of shouting with no response, we figured our hunting was ruined for the night, and so we packed up. The next day, Jim and I went back to try to find tracks or signs of who was messing with us the night before. We were hoping to find what direction they'd come from. But the underbrush was too thick, and while we searched, we talked about what kind of arm the person must have had to throw that log. 30 yards is a pretty good throw for a stick that size. For a while, that's how things went for us. We'd be hunting, and then sticks and rocks or cotton seeds would be thrown at us, and we'd yell like we did the first night, and it became a hunting as usual routine. We figured someone was set on ruining our hunts, but we weren't going to be run off by someone that didn't like us hunting there. It did make us extra careful about what we were firing at. We made triple sure that we weren't firing on the harasser or harassers. And as annoying as it was, we decided that none of us was ever to hunt alone on that property anymore, and we continued bagging our fair share of hogs, but we never found any tracks. We made up our minds that it was someone poaching the land, and they were good at hiding their movement. We had several game cameras set up throughout the property, but we never got any pictures of anything other than normal wildlife. We did sometimes catch a whiff of something that didn't smell like any animal that I know of. It was an ungodly mix of wet dog and hot garbage, with just a hint of sulfur or ammonia. Then things began to happen that convinced us that we were dealing with something more than human harassers. My father, he's my best friend, and my brother came in from out of state to do some hog hunting with us, and we began our hunt at the edge of the pecan field as usual, but we never saw anything. Our visitors were only there for the night, and the moon was full, so we decided to go down to the farm's dirt service road that was cut into the trees leading to the creek. We figured we might get a chance to run up on a hog near that water. We've killed a few of them down that road when they were wallowing in the mud to cool off. We moved near the water until we could hear some movement coming from the creek, and as it got closer, we took a knee to wait for it to expose itself near the road. Whatever it was, it stopped just shy of the road beyond our sight, and after a couple of minutes that felt more like hours, something hit me in the chest. It didn't hurt, it just surprised the heck out of me, and I looked down and I saw a cottonseed at my feet. Well, that freaked me out because we were a long way from the nearest cotton field, and I jumped up and was about to turn my weapon light on when Jim told me to wait. There was some more movement closer to the road, and then he heard a loud grunt right before it ran away through the shallow creek. The grunt was not a hog or a deer. The sound of it running through the water told us it was bipedal. It was making a loud splash like a person running ankle-deep in water, but the splashes were too far apart, and whatever made that sound, it had a huge stride. We pulled out of the woods and returned to our cars, and our visitors drove separately. In our car, Jim and Greg and I were in a tense conversation about what could have made those noises. We figured it didn't expect so many of us to be on the trail, so when it got eyes on us, it turned and ran. We were beginning to lean toward the possibility of the stories about Sasquatch being true, but with the jobs we have, never making assumptions and seeking solid evidence before confirming suspicions is ingrained in us. So we continued on, but with extra caution and large caliber weapons. One night, Greg brought in a couple of friends for a dog hunt. These guys had 2 catch dogs and 1 bay dog. They were no slouches. The catch dogs were pit mixes, and they were well equipped with GPS trackers and night vision and a lot of success in previous hunts. It was a hot summer night, and we were excited to get our first dog hunt in. The handlers sent the dogs into the tree line to start the hunt, and it wasn't long before the dogs had their catch, and the bay dog began barking to let us know. We tracked the dogs using the GPS, and we got within 200 feet of them when the dogs moved away from us. And as we pushed further in, we got a whiff of that same scent we'd smelled in previous hunts. For the next hour, the dogs would stop, and we'd move toward them, and then they'd move off before we could see them through the underbrush. The handlers thought the dogs might have gotten into a hog too big for them to pin down completely. We decided to pull back to our parked vehicles while the handlers tried to recall their dogs. Only one of the catch dogs returned. He wasn't injured, but he had some blood on his muzzle. They put him in his kennel, and the bay dog continued to holler when they tried to recall him. On the GPS, the dogs were showing as being a bit less than a quarter of a mile away, and we decided to try to get closer to the dogs in case they couldn't hear us or the collars were malfunctioning or something. We pushed into the woods, and again, when we got close, the dogs moved away. The handlers were getting worried and started yelling as loud as they could to get the dogs to return. And when the dogs moved away yet again, we started running to try to get close enough to see what was happening. And after running a hard mile through the woods and thorny vines and thick underbrush, we finally caught up to the dogs near the creek. The catch dog was laying on his side with a circular stab wound in his left temple. He was dead. The bay dog was standing over him, barking toward the brush. We thought a hog's tusk had finally gotten him, but when we inspected him, rigor mortis was beginning to set in. If he'd just recently stopped moving, that wasn't possible. His fur was wet, but there was no blood or other injuries anywhere on him, and it was as if he had been carried and put down where we had found him. If a hog had dragged him, he'd have been dirty and beat up, and again, that smell permeated the area. The handlers collected their dogs, and we all walked out to the cars. The handlers loaded up their dogs and left without saying a word. They were definitely spooked and refused all invitations to ever hunt with us again. Despite all of this, we never did officially call it a Sasquatch encounter. We had several more similar encounters, but we never did lay eyes on one. The South Georgia brush is so thick that you can hardly see a few feet in front of you. We spent the rest of the summer trying to find hard evidence to provide proof. We set up game cameras, but all that did was convince me that they can see infrared illuminators and are smart enough to avoid them. Jim had read about tree knocking, so we finally decided to give it a try to challenge them into coming out. We parked about 200 yards from the tree line, and we walked up to 150 yards from the tree line in the pecan field. We borrowed a PVS-14 monocular to get an advantage with good night vision, and after being there for about an hour with Jim knocking on a pecan tree with a dowel rod, we finally saw them. Jim unclipped and handed me the monocular, saying, "Scan the tree line to our left." Near the first row of pecan trees outside the tree line, there were 3 of them, with 2 more further back in the tree line itself. It was a clear night and plenty of starlight to feed the night vision. They were absolutely massive, and the tallest of the 3 was a good 8.5 to 9 feet tall. The 2 at the tree line were smaller, though, with the perspective and the trees shading them from the light. It was hard to tell if they were significantly smaller. The night vision didn't let us see the color, and we were too far away to see a good detail on their faces, but they were muscular with thick shoulders and short necks. Their hair was matted, and it reflected some light in the night vision as if they had been in creek water, and they were standing there watching us with no idea that we could see them with our passive night vision. We were never fans of shooting one to use the corpse as evidence. They're just animals doing their thing. We're not sport hunters. We eat or donate the meat from our kills. But we didn't like our chances against 5 of them if they decided to attack, so we decided to bug out. I handed Jim the monocular, and we walked backwards to Jim's truck slowly with rifles out. Jim said that they were not advancing on us, but they were keeping pace with us. And when we got to the truck, I jumped into the bed and covered Jim while he got into the driver's seat and got us out of there. We started referring to them as our friends, whenever anyone might be around to overhear us talking. We never did get them to come out into the open again. They still throw stuff at us to remind us that they're still out there. We decided, as long as they made no overtly aggressive actions toward us, that we would not shoot at them. The sticks and rocks and seeds smarted on occasion, but we did not see it as enough to respond with deadly force. We did, however, start wearing our armor while we were out there. The next year, the farmer who owned the land leased the property out from under us to a friend for deer hunting. We found out later from his son that the guy only hunted once and he never came back. The farmer has since passed away, and we have not been able to get permission from his estate to continue our hunts. We're still working on it. We have better technology now to obtain proof that they're still out there. And one last thing. Once, when I was working the night shift, I got a call from a coworker who had gone out with Jim and Greg. And as soon as I answered, he started to cuss me out. Well, as an ex-Marine, he had a lot of inventive ways to swear. And after his verbal assault calmed down, he asked me why I never told him about our friends on the hunting property. Well, I asked him if he'd ever believed me, and he said probably not, and he hung up on me. We never talked about it again, but that short chat proved to me that we were not crazy or seeing things. I believe the behaviors we witnessed from these creatures were threat displays to protect their hunting grounds. They could just as easily be very dangerous if they want to.